Hello everybody, welcome back. In this video, we shall look at a very interesting Scratch feature called the cloud variables. A lot of students ask me about these. They want to know what these cloud variables are, how they can be used, and so on. So I thought a short video on this topic will be helpful for a lot of people. Uh, what we will do in this video is first we will look at what cloud variables are from a sort of abstract perspective, and then we shall apply these in two games in two you know two we'll give you two examples of these cloud variables using the games that we do in our beginners batch, right, in a beginners class, so that it's kind of starts making more sense for you, right? So let's get started, right? So basically, what are cloud variables, right? So now the first thing you have to understand is that variables, if you recall, are basically like containers which can store information, right? So I gave you this example. We had a lesson on variables in our class, right? So essentially, variables are containers that store information. Now, typically, when we are doing Scratch on our laptop or a PC, we are generally connected to the internet, and that connects us to the Scratch servers, right? So, what happens is that when we are creating variables, most of the time, the normal variables that we create get stored inside the laptop itself. I mean, the browser of the laptop. However, cloud variables are special in the sense that they do not get stored here. Instead, they get stored in the Scratch servers, which is accessible to you over the internet, right? So basically, if you were to look at this, normal variables live here, and then the cloud variables, by contrast, live in the Scratch servers, right? Now, what that does, right? It's really amazing actually, because since these are on the server, it turns out that anybody who's accessing your game can get a copy of this variable. So, and also, since this variable is available to anybody, it can be used for some information which can go across every session, right? So what do I mean by that? For example, some kind of a high score, right? So you play a game and you get some high score. You can store that in a cloud variable, because next time when somebody accesses that game, that cloud variable will remember what was the high score scored previously, right? And similarly, a low score, right? So it's a very powerful thing, right? However, a little bit care is needed, because we should store in cloud only those variables which are really meaningful to be in the cloud, right? So not every variable needs to go there, because in fact it will slow down your program if you did that. So most variables can be here, but some special variables can be put in the cloud, right? Now, like I said, to make all this more concrete, let's look at some examples from our beginners lesson. So where we, for example, do this catch game, right? So now recall, this catch game is very simple. You have this bowl and you're supposed to catch apple, orange, and watermelon. Catching watermelon gives you negative point, right? Catching orange and apple gives you positive points, right? And the game lasts for some time, after which the game gets over, right? So now, let's say, for the sake of this illustration, I will make this time to say 10 seconds, right? Just for the sake of illustration, so that it ends fast. So maybe I'm playing this game. I got, let's say, got 40 points. I got whatever, right? Now the game is about to get over. Maybe my score is 30 points, right? So now I would, let's say, want to store this as a variable in the cloud, right? So if I want to store this as a variable in the cloud, so that next time if I score more than 30, then basically I know that I am some kind of a highest scorer in this game, right? So how do I do that, right? Well, it turns out that you can create a cloud variable by pretty much the regular process that you create a variable. So click on variables. Now you say create make a variable, right? Now notice that you will see something called cloud variable here, and it says stored on server, like I told you earlier. Let's say I give this variable a name called high score, right? So what I really mean by this is that I want to keep track of the high scores that people have scored in this game, right? Now, in order to make this a cloud variable, I must click this tick, right? And you'll notice that the moment you click this tick mark, you will see that this variable has to be for all sprites only, right? So it can't be using for this sprite only, which is fine, because like I said, the nature of variables here is those which have some kind of a long-term value. For example, the high score here, right? So it doesn't really matter what internally happened, but at the end of the game we got high score, which we are going to score, right? Now, some of you may not even see this option, right? So what does that mean? If you don't even see this option, please do not worry, because the feature of cloud variable is available only for what's called a scratcher, right? So scratchers are people who have been on the Scratch platform for a while, who have built sufficient number of projects and shared them, right? So once you do that, then you'll get a mail from the Scratch community that now you have become a scratcher and you are allowed to store variables on the cloud, right? So hence you get a cloud variable facility. My guess is that if you let's say build several projects, for example, through a beginner class, share them, chances are very high that you will be a scratcher by then, right? So that's why we use our beginner games to illustrate these points, because we are also going to use some concepts which we learn through the beginners program, right? So all right, so I assume that you are a scratcher. If you're not a scratcher, worry not. Eventually, if you stay active on the Scratch platform, you will become a scratcher, and then you can use this thing, right? So you can come back to this little bit later, probably, right? So however I say this, I'll say okay. Now one thing is that Scratch does not allow text or letters to be, text means like sentences, letters, to be a part of a cloud variable, and there's very good reason for that, right? The main usage for, like I said, this cloud variables is numbers. So which means we are, for example, going to score our highest score in this cloud variable, right? So what I'll do is, remember, this game here gets over when the time gets over, right? So we have this loop called repeat for time left seconds. So time left is 10 now. Basically this loop will run for 10 seconds. Every 1 second we will reduce time by 1, right? And at the end of it we are saying stop all, the game gets over, right? Now let's say here, right here, I make a condition that if my score is more than the high score, right? So which basically there's somebody has played this game. If my score is more than the high score, which means previously somebody made maybe 30 points, if I got, let's say, 40 points, then the high score should get updated to 40, and hence you can remember, okay, the best that somebody has scored in this game is probably 40, right? So that's the whole idea. Very similar to the regular variables, but the implications are different, right? So I can go to if statement here, and I can say, look, if, instead of stop all here, so I can say if, let's say in an operator, I can say if score is greater than, so score is here, if score is greater than high score, let's say score is greater than high score, then basically go and update the high score to the score, right? So what you can do is to say set high score to score, right? Now notice one thing, that the moment you do any of this, you are seeing a small little cloud thing here, and that's because this is a cloud variable. So this tells you that this is a cloud variable, right? And why this is also interesting is because sometimes I see students using let's say things like an apple point, orange point, watermelon points as cloud variables. I recommend you do not do that, right? Because those variables are really meant to be within your system, right? But this is something that can be stored in the cloud. So so this is helpful. So in case you're seeing let's say basically, let's say you're seeing a cloud kind of thing here, then it's a cloud variable. You do not want to probably do that, right? So you can delete the variable and create it again. But however, this is a cloud variable, so this is going to get stored in the cloud, right? So I'm saying that if the score that I have is more than the high score, right? The previously high score was maybe 0, right? If I get the score, then set the high score to the score. If it's not, then do nothing, right? So now let's see what happens here, right? So high score is 0. So game starts. Maybe I will, let's say I will, okay, I'll try to score some points, try to avoid the watermelon, right? I've got 35 points here. Now game got over. I had 45 points and high score became 45, right? Now when I start this game again, my score became 0, but my high score is still 45, right? So if I go more than 45, I hope I can do that this time, right? If I go more than 45, oops. Oh, it turns out I got again 45, right? But let's say I try again and I try to get more than 45, then I will essentially end up, right? So if I don't lose points now, I should see that my score is 105. 105 is more than the previous high score, which was 45, and hence the high score is now 105, right? So I'm going to share this code. You can, so I do that I do it right away. Now anybody playing this game, right, will always see this high score and can try to beat this high score. So it kind of gives you a target to beat for, right? And like I said, it's on the cloud, so anybody seeing that will have this this thing available to you. And in fact, it will say once you do the cloud variable, you will have this thing written here, cloud variables, right? So yeah, so this is one example. Now let's take one more example. Now this will require a little bit more work, a little bit more thinking. Remember, this is a maze game that we built, right? So this game is very simple. I basically have this monkey which has to reach the bananas, right? And the moment I hit the black line, it kind of the game gets over, right? But now let's say I modify this game a little bit. I say that instead of the game getting over right away, right? So I'll say that what I can do is that if I do hit the black line, then I send the monkey back to the original position and also update its costume, right? So I take this, I'll duplicate, and I will, let's say I did this, right? So what this does is that it will, make sure that the game basically never gets over, because if I do hit the line, I come back to this point, right? So now the goal of this game has become that I have to somehow end this game as fast as I can, right? So remember, as fast as I can, right? Which means it's kind of reverse from the score. So I have to do it faster than the previous one, right? In this previous score case, I was trying to score as much as I could. Now I'm trying to do as less as I can, right? Now, how can I measure the time that I take from going from, let's say, from the time I click start till the time I reach the monkeys, right? So remember, there's a function called timer in Scratch. We have talked about this. I'm putting a video in the description. You can you can look at that. We cover that again in our beginners program, right? So we will say we are going to use this timer right now. Timer, remember, is an endless clock. It never stops, but we can reset it, right? So what I can do is that I can reset timer in the beginning. So when I click the flag, I say I reset timer, right? When I basically reach the, so when I reach the, when basically monkey goes and touches the banana, instead of stopping all right away, I can say, I can have a variable. So I can say, maybe I'll make a variable here. Let's call it time taken, right? Let's say I'll say, let it be time taken. So this is not, again, this is not a cloud variable yet, but I'll say a variable called time taken. So I'll say, okay, I reset the timer in the beginning. At the end of this thing, I'll say set time taken to maybe, I'll set it to the timer, right? So because remember, timer will get reset, it will become 0, then it will be counting upwards from there, and then maybe I can just stop this. So now see what happens. Basically, whenever I complete this challenge, whatever time I have taken, okay, so I took longer than this, I have to be a little bit careful, right? So if I, oops, so I go back again, right? If I did this, right? If I did this, oops, oops. So let me try to be a little bit careful, otherwise I'll have to slow down the whole game, right? So oops. Let me see if I can get this correct this time round very slowly, otherwise I will just, okay. So I'm taking a long time to do this, but basically what I want to show you is that at the end of this, if I do reach the banana, right? If I do reach the banana, okay, looks like this time I will. And notice I took 56 seconds to do this. And the reason I got to know this is because the timer had been reset here, right? And at the end of this, I have set the time taken to timer, right? Now, let's say I want to go further and I want to give you an indication of the lowest time ever that has been taken to play this game, right? So what I can do now is that I can now create a cloud variable, right? So I'll go here and say, go create a variable. So make a variable and let's call it, say, the lowest time, right? So if I say, I call it the lowest time, again, I must click this cloud variable, right? The moment I do that, this thing goes away. That's fine. And if, like I said, if you're not seeing this, it only means you're not yet a scratcher. You need to do a few more projects and then you will be a scratcher, right? So I'll say create a cloud variable called lowest time. Now, the moment I do this, I get this variation, get this message as before that cloud variables can only support numbers, which is fine for us. And also the cloud variable, because the lowest time is a cloud variable, I see this cloud kind of symbol coming up here, right? Now, notice that what I really want to do is that at this point of time, I want to store, right? If the, if I'm touching the bananas, I want to store the time taken to the lowest time, right? So here it's a little bit more tricky. So what I will do is that I will, instead of doing it within this forever loop, I will actually use a broadcast. So I'll say broadcast, let's say, I will say broadcast, and message one, I can just say, maybe, I can say, let's say check lowest time, right? So basically it's like a, it's like a command. Broadcast, remember, is a message that goes to every sprite, everybody. So I can use it to control the flow of this code. So I can say broadcast check lowest time, and then when I receive check lowest time, right? So when I receive check lowest time, now remember I got to store the time that is the lowest time, right? So if my time taken is less than the lowest time, then I should store it, right? But then the problem is the time taken is always going to be a positive number, right? So I must first make sure that the lowest time gets enrolled. Otherwise, lowest time is zero, and I will never hit that, right? So what I will do is that I'll put two conditions here, right? I'll say if, let's say maybe I'll put two of these, right? Let's just duplicate this. So if, let's say I'll say if the lowest time, in the operators, I'll go and say if lowest time is equal to zero. So if lowest time is equal to zero, which means that, for example, now I've just created this variable, then I can just say set lowest time to time taken, right? So what will happen is for the very first time somebody plays this, I would have made sure that my lowest time now is 56, for example. The first time the score will be indeed put in the lowest time. Thereafter, I make a check that if my time taken is less than the lowest time, right? So here it will become, lowest time goes on the right side. If time taken is less than the lowest time, then again I will basically set this to the lowest time, right? So this looks a little long, but you think about it, it's very logical. What we are trying to do is we do not want the time lowest time to be always zero. If I did not do this condition, then lowest time will always be zero. So here I have a condition that, sorry, if I did not do this, then the lowest time will always be zero, because time taken will always be more than zero, right? So I set that to the lowest time. Thereafter I keep checking if it's exceeding, and then of course I can just stop all, right? So with this, let's see what happens. So lowest time is 56, right? Let's say if I do lower than 56, I'll be a little bit more careful this time. It took a long time in the last round, right? So if I do this a little bit more carefully, for example, now, right, the lowest time is become, because I took 13 seconds, now the lowest time is also 13. Let's try this again, right? So if I did this, right, it's actually quite a nice exercise for your concentration and for your fingers and so on and so forth as well, right? So this time I'm taking long, I guess, right? But if I do manage to do it less than 13, then that will become my lowest time, right? So in fact, you can kind of now play this game, and you can put in the comments what was your lowest time, right? So as always, I'm going to share this game with you, right? And I'll put the link also in the description. So I hope this gave you an idea, right, that how the cloud variable was. Just to recap, cloud variables are stored in the cloud server, in the Scratch server. We do not use them just for every variable, because it's not needed, right? However, there are things we can use them for, and the most interesting use case, simplest use case really is scoring the highest score or the lowest time depending on the game that you're building, and it's kind of that history remains, right? So you can even do more. Okay, lowest time, second lowest time, third lowest time, and so on and so forth, right? So you can create much more information around this, right? So I hope you found this useful. Take care, enjoy, bye bye, thank you.